Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we have a pretty early Pull 3 or Series 3 build that was created by a user in my Discord, Pilk Enjoyer, and it was created over 2 months ago, but it is still incredibly efficient at being able to handle just about anything in the meta. It has counters to any strong Hawk decks. It has a counter in the Cosmo to Silver Surfer decks. It has the ramp component, and I have found that it's a lot easier to get a cheeky early Professor X lockdown than what it used to be because of Galactus. So now that Galactus is in the mix, a lot of times you see an Electro, you see a wave, and I immediately start thinking, what lane are they going to be playing Galactus in? So at that point, I don't try to push my high-powered stuff onto the board. Depending on what I have, I either try to misdirect or redirect, or find ways that I'll be able to angle to win a single lane rather than the entire board. And in that uncertainty comes opportunity. You're able to use Professor X quite a bit more consistently to lock down some of those early game lanes, and then you have your strong, high-powered finishers or your counter cards, depending on what you're seeing and what your opponent is playing. So overall, the only Series 3 cards in this list are Electro and Destroyer, and it runs phenomenally. The Enchantress slot could be subbed out for a Shang-Chi, or another high-power tempo card like Lizard, so that you can make sure that you have initiative over any kind of arrow plays or things like that. But overall, even in a full collection build, this has served me incredibly well, and it has a lot of answers and a very good high average power push. And so let's go ahead and jump over into a couple of games. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, first up we have Batburger, and the first location is Rickety Bridge, so we're going to avoid that. Maybe we can sneak in something like a Professor X to guarantee that we lock it down. Maybe we throw our Electro in there and expect for it to get destroyed. But with some of these new locations, we have found that a lot of them definitely help out some of these earlier Electro ramp style builds. Plus, like I said in the intro, it creates that air of uncertainty for the opponent. They don't know exactly what you're playing. A lot of times they're going to think that it's a Galactus, and so then they're going to start playing around a Galactus, and then all of a sudden you lock down with a Professor X, and there's just not much that they can do at that point. And so they do throw down a Groot. They threw down a Domino on the first turn, so it could very likely be a Silver Surfer build. And we do top deck into our Professor X, so we could either try to sneak it into the Rickety Bridge, but I think the opponent will probably play away from the Rickety Bridge, knowing that we want our Electro destroyed. And so knowing that, I'm going to go ahead and try to lock down the Rickety Bridge. I think we'll get an easy lock. They do play Brood into Hellfire Club. And so now, next turn, we could use a Hobgoblin to negatively impact the one remaining lane. We've already won the far left lane. Now all we have to worry about is winning the far right lane in Atlantis. And knowing that they have a Silver Surfer, they could do a Maximus for 7 power. They could do a Wolfsbane for 7 power, and then the Silver Surfer potentially. I think between the Hobgoblin and Gamora next turn, I don't think we should have any issues with locking this one down and winning it. So they used an arrow, which is kind of interesting in a Silver Surfer, I assume, Silver Surfer build. I'm not sure why it was teched in, but that leaves them with only one spot to play in Atlantis, and we had at least a 12 power push in Gamora, or we could have countered any kind of on reveal abilities with our Cosmo, but overall we put them in an unwinnable position, and so we were able to sneak out and win that game. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Adi Indris. And the first location is Machine World, and the second one is Mojo World. This deck doesn't do great at flooding a location, so something like Mojo World is not going to be to our strength. Instead, I think I'm going to play Iceman into the last unknown location. If we do something like Destroyer into Machine World at some point, that's perfectly fine. They're not really going to be able to utilize that very well. So I'm going to go ahead and play our Cosmo. If we had our Electro to ramp into an early Professor X, I would actually play it into Mojo World and try to sneak that location away from the opponent. And they actually did something kind of silly. They sent us one of their rocks, which allows us to flood more cards into Mojo World. So if they don't play anything into that lane this turn, on turn 5, we're going to lock it down with a Professor X. And so unless they flood 3 cards here this turn, we should be able to very easily steal Mojo World. And then on the last turn, we can do our Destroyer and Subterranea. And a lot of times that's going to be enough for us to find the win. Now they are running a Zabu, so they could have a Hawk. They could have a couple of cards that are going to send us additional rocks. And at that point, it is a little bit rough. But I do still think we have a really good shot here. And so they play 2 cards into Mojo World, but those 2 cards are not going to be enough. They do a Spider-Man lock. to try to keep us out of the Mojo world and make it easy for them to win it, they did try a Jubilee, so having initiative there was very, very important. They tried a Jubilee to pull into one last resource, but of course it was already locked down with Professor X, and so they're not able to pull into anything. I think that is enough for us to find the win. They did a relatively weak Sunspot play. Now, if they have Hawk, that is a very dangerous Hawk, because we have 8 cards in our deck thanks to Subterranea. They have, of course, been potentially drawing those rocks instead of their Hawk or their resources. I do think we're going to lean into the Destroyer on the far right. If they have 2 Hawks somehow, so a Hawk and a Mystique, odds are they split them up, trying to divvy up that power, and we're going to focus all of ours into one lane. And knowing that we had the 100-point win in Mojo World, they do go ahead and retreat. We will take those. Since we're seeing a lot of Zabu, a lot of times those decks develop a little bit too late to be incredibly efficient or maintain tempo or initiative up through turns 4 and 5. And so if you can find a way to ramp up or sneak in your Professor X before they really get going, a lot of times you can completely derail their strategy. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Antique Healbot, and the first location being Icebox hits our Sunspot, so we actually can't use it on curve. We might drop it on turn 2. Most likely, we don't really care to protect our Iceman, and actually we can do a Sunspot on turn 3. We can do Electro, we can protect the lane with a Cosmo, and we just get a really big Gamma Lab location. All the while, we offered a little bit of disruption with Iceman. It is that hidden value. You never know if it hits one of their key targets, but it can very, very heavily disrupt their curve, especially if they're running a very tight, efficient deck. If it hits a Zabu, they all of a sudden miss out on one really good power potential turn. And so we actually hit their Black Panther, which gets discarded there. So it was a really, really good hit for us, but unfortunately we lose it. So we're going to play the Electro into Gamma Lab, and that will give us the extra energy. It's going to turn it. They use an Electro as well. So they have an Electro, an Ebony Maw. I'm really confused. Typically those two aren't used together, the Electro and the Black Panther, but it could be closer to the original Black Panther list that runs things like Arnhem Zola or Taskmaster to really spread that power out wide. And so maybe it's a Wong. No, it's a Leech. But the Leech does not go off because of our Cosmo, and we do get the retreat. Sometimes you just happen to hit those plays on curve, especially when they limit their locations that they're able to play with something like Ebony Maw. We're going to take that one cube. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Special K, and the first location is Shuri's Lab, so it's going to double the power of any cards we play there, which is phenomenal. We don't have our Electro ramp, but if we can sneak some early cards over there and lock it down with Professor X, that is absolutely beautiful. Their Iceman does hit our Cosmo. That is better than it hitting our Professor X. I would much rather hit the Cosmo than Professor X, because then he almost becomes unusable at that point. We still don't have any of our playable cards. We have our high-end cards, but not our low-end. And so we're still going to look for a way to claw our way out of this one. We do get the Electro ramp, especially without seeing any other cards come down here. I see an Electro ramp, I'm immediately going to think Galactus. I'm going to think, how can I conserve and find a way to win with the Galactus play? And so I think they will play into Lemuria. And knowing that, I'm going to play our Professor X into Shuri's Lab. It's a bit of a gamble, but we're going to take it. That will allow us to do a free Destroyer, potentially do a Cosmo, probably into Lemuria to try to block the last turn Silver Surfer play. And they do play into Lemuria with their Polaris. It doesn't have anything to pull into, but we do get the early ramp Professor X lock. And so now we can freely drop our Destroyer. We could go with a Cosmo. So if we go with a Hobgoblin here, so if I'm Special K, I'm not going to cap out the Brood lane, the Atlantis lane, because I want to have that flexibility of where I play on that last turn. We're going to try something a little bit scary here. We're going to use Hobgoblin into Atlantis. This makes or breaks the game, because if we can cap this one out, if they use Silver Surfer, they're going to use it in Lemuria, and we can just play a Cosmo and walk our way to victory. So they use a Sarah. We are going to send them the Hobgoblin. That is going to block off their Atlantis lane. Even as is right now, they could win the Atlantis lane with a Silver Surfer. But knowing that that is their play line and they only have this one location left to play in, and we have initiative, we're going to throw down the Cosmo. Then now, if they have a Mr. Fantastic, they actually win here. If they use a Silver Surfer, that's going to buff this up by 9. We're just going to play the Destroyer and get it over with. I think the Cosmo would have been a fun play line, but there was a potential way for them to still win, and Mr. Fantastic is commonly ran with Silver Surfer. So although it would have been really fun to counter and block the Cosmo, I think we would have just leaned in. We were better off leaning in with the Destroyer. He would have been 20 power, which would have overcame any buff that they had in the Atlantis lane. Let's go ahead and take the 1 cube and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Kane, and we actually lose to Kane quite often on our main account. And so I don't know if it's good or bad that we're matching up against the same people on our alternate account as we are on our 130 ranked main account. It's just kind of surprising. But there's about a 40 rank gap between the two because I haven't played much on our alternate account this season, and we're still matching up against them. And so the last location is Grand Central, so that's going to pull into one of our cards. I think to make sure that Destroyer does not just wreak havoc on our board, we're going to go with Cosmo into Grand Central. That way, ooh, that means we're going to want to prioritize dropping the Hobgoblin. And then Kane is running the Clutter Junk deck, which is really unfortunate, but I get it. I get it. We want to prioritize dropping the Hobgoblin because if it pulls into Grand Central, that's just going to be, it's going to add insult to injury. We're going to drop our armor into the Danger Room. That's going to allow us to safely drop Hobgoblin to send over their way. And then no matter what gets pulled into Grand Central, we're happy with the results. Now with the Titanium Green Goblin, they did end up capping out the Hell's Kitchen location, but honestly, that's okay. We have our Sunspot that's going to be able to soak some additional energy and give us additional value that way, making it harder for them to do an easy 1 or 2 card drop to win the location. So we are going to try to send them the Hobgoblin. Hopefully they don't cap out their Danger Room location this turn. We're going to send them the Hobgoblin. That's going to give us a decent push in the Danger Room. Now, knowing that this list is very similar, if not the exact same, to the one that I ran recently, they could have a Doc Ock here, and they could be considering playing Doc Ock, which could have drawn into our Destroyer and wiped out our left and our right lane. There is the Doc Ock, and it could have happened. I'm glad it did not, but it could have. And so they pull into their debris in Grand Central. Right now, we're winning the Danger Room by 7 and Hell's Kitchen by 8. But if they play any card over here, then it's going to bounce Titania back onto their side. So I think our best bet is just doing the Destroyer into Grand Central. They're going to have to split some of their power. This is going to make sure that they at least have to play in these 2 lanes to win the game. This would have to be a pretty big power push, something like a Gamora, but then they would be relying on us playing something there. Because if not, it's going to be a tie, and I think we lose the tiebreaker, actually. So a Gamora and a Sunspot would actually be enough to swing this maybe in their favor. I don't know. We're going to lock in the Destroyer and see if maybe they can hold it out. They do play a card into Grand Central. The Hazmat is an interesting piece. So the players comes down, but it is not enough. I'm not sure I agree with the Hazmat play line. Because yes, you're sending them junk, but you also have quite a bit that you play onto your side of the board. And so it doesn't offer a whole lot of late game value, but it does almost get them the win. We do pull it out. We are going to go ahead and end the video here. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Early Electro ramp, if you have Electro, if you have Destroyer, is still very viable. You can run this against just about anything that you're seeing, whether you get the Professor X ramp or not. It can still do some really strong, powerful plays that can compete with most decks. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.